Hey, this is Tiger. Welcome to my stream. And thank you, AJ, for the good evening. It's always so great to see you on the chat. That means that I actually made it live in the stream. Yeah, welcome to Train Sim World 5, now that its days are numbered. And early on we got the message that Train Sim World 6 will be released later this year. We don't know a lot about what it will contain, but we will know that with the end of this year we will be playing Train Sim World 6 and no longer Train Sim World 5. Nevertheless, there have been a lot of new releases in the past days, and there was a release that was a so-called shadow release because it was not announced, and it is this locomotive that was released, the HSP46, or well, not really, because this was released together with the Boston Commuter DLC a couple of months ago already. But so far it did not layer over to the Boston Sprinter DLC, and this is what we got now, the HSP46 for the Boston Providence route, together with some gameplay stuff, a new timetable for Boston Providence, and 3 new scenarios, I think. And now the HSP46 is also on Boston Providence, not only on Boston Worcester as it was before. And yeah, the good thing for people who already owned the Boston Worcester route was that the gameplay pack was free and they didn't have to pay the €6 that was sold for. Yeah, and for me it gave me finally the opportunity to look into American content again. I have done this in a bit because there have not been so many releases of American content, and look into the many different versions of American safety systems, PTC systems. In this case, the ACSES II version that the MBTA, the Massachusetts Bay Transport Authority, runs over their existing legacy ATC systems. And Theodoros, hello Tiger and all, he says, so nice to have you on the stream, Theodoros. And this is a good thing because I found out a new way of getting better and more reliable information about those systems, but we will talk about this later on when we get to the presentation. First, let's turn on all the relevant markers. So we will start in the Boston Worcester route with a training module. A training module that they introduced in this route to teach you how to operate the ATC. For some reason they call it the ATCS, maybe because it is a system, and the ACSES that is implemented in this route and had been on the Boston Sprinter route already before. And since I got the Boston Worcester route free of charge from Dovetail, I will add this disclaimer. You all know that I am an ambassador now, so that I don't have to pay money for the DLCs for the new ones anymore, and a couple of older ones I get also for free. But this does not change anything in terms of what I tell you about my opinion about what we are playing here. And having said this, I can tell you that I'm not so super happy about how this training scenario worked. Murica, says Theodorus, yes. And well, now I'm in the wrong slot anyway. Train depot, the training modules for the HSP. No, it is not connected with the HSP. It is obviously connected with the Boston Worcester route training modules. Here, the ATCS and ACSES introduction module. We're going to play this first and we're going to discuss it. And you can tell me if it actually did anything for you. Yeah, because it is going actually with the F40 PH3C that was already released with the Boston Sprinter DLC. So we will save the HSP46 for later when we will actually drive it in a scenario or a service. I think it's more like a service that we are playing today. Yeah, it is a good thing that they implement an introduction for the safety systems. It is not so great a thing if what the person tells you in this module actually does not comply with what the game does. So I would like to have my sound back, and here it is. So let's check out what they are telling us and what the game is actually doing. And yeah, at least when I played this the first time, it did not really fit together. City Radar, hey!
In this training module, you will be taken through the basics of understanding ATC, Automatic Train Control, and ACSES, Advanced Civil Speed Enforcement System.
Let's have some lights, otherwise we don't see that much. Set the automatic brake to full service, so this locomotive is already set up a bit. The automatic brake to full service, they said, sorry. Full service.
ATC and ACSES work together to relay signal aspects and speed restrictions to the equipment in the cab. You should always follow in-cab signaling, even if you have not enabled enforcement.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Now that ATC and ACSES enforcement has been enabled, penalties may be applied if speed limits are violated or if system alarms are not properly acknowledged. Now, let's take a look at the in-cab equipment. All relevant information pertaining to ATC and ACSES will be displayed on the SDU Speed Display Unit. Most of your information will be displayed in this SDU. The speed limit indicator on the SDU displays the current ATC or ACSES aspect, depending on which is illuminated.
ATC?
The area is currently
ACSES.
under ACSES. Below that is a speedometer. You should always adhere to the lowest of these two speeds, even if enforcement isn't enabled.
Yeah, it should be under ACSES, but it is under
Let's get
ATC.
moving and see how ATC and ACSES will enforce speed limit changes.
It's actually a thing. In the original Boston Sprinter route, you actually start with access control in the South Station, where you have a speed limit of 10. That is controlled by ACSES. Here on this line in the Boston Worcester route, for some reason it misses, so it is missing, so that you get only the restricting cab signal aspect, what is the most restricting aspect that you can get from the ATC of 20 instead of the 10. But you can see that the speed limit is at 10 and should be controlled by ACSES, and this is what the guy who is telling us here how this thing is supposed to operate thought that it will be like, but it's not. So let's see if we find our alerter control. Aha, it's up there. Alerter. Alerter, safety devices, and now they are actually turned on. Set the automatic brake to release, alright. Brake cylinders are draining. Reverse is to forward. And Theodora says driver training modules for Gen Z. Well, Gen Z or not, if they say it is controlled by ACSES, then it should be controlled by ACSES and not controlled by ATC, with ACSES missing. We actually do not have any light. We have ACSES cut in. We have a valid database, but we don't have any aspect here. The lights are really super strong here. going out. Slow clear aspect on the dwarf. I always love watching the train leaving Boston South Station, but I almost always hate driving it, because you have to stick to the 10 limit and then it is going downhill a bit until it increases to 15. The next slow clear on the dwarf. And since it is a training module, those objective markers are turned on by force. Without anyone being able to change that.
The SDU is currently showing the track speed limit, which must not be exceeded.
No, it isn't. It is showing the ATC
The alerter
aspect.
will sound periodically if certain controls are not interacted with.
That's true.
When this happens, you must acknowledge the alerter or penalty braking will be applied. If a penalty brake application occurs, recover control of the train by setting the brake handle to suppression or greater and acknowledging the alarm. Once at or below the required speed, the brakes can be released. This is called a running release.
That is more or less true for ATC and ACSES, but we will get to this in the presentation later. We have actually quite a lot of acknowledge buttons. This is the alerter reset. This is the ACS acknowledge. And we have an acknowledge button here as well. Now we're getting closer to those signals here. Hopefully they will show us a proceed aspect. Yes, it is an approach. You can see how the locomotive is picking up some speed.
The SDU is currently displaying a clear aspect.
No, it's not. It is displaying an approach
not
aspect.
exceeding the maximum authorized speed. The
Yeah.
onboard computer keeps track of the train's position and calculates a safe braking curve for upcoming ACSES speed restrictions.
Yeah, if there were any, this is what the system would do. And it is not showing a clear aspect. The aspect would be here. It is showing an approach aspect. This is why it is limiting us to 30. And, well, they unfortunately did not fix the typo in this texture here that says TPP instead of APP, what is for short for approach, right? On the HSP46 it has been fixed and it says APP there, but not on the F40. They just left it as it was since day one in Boston Sprinter.
The next signal is displaying a less favorable aspect than clear. When passing this point, the cab signal aspect on the SDU will change in order to conform. The ACSES onboard computer keeps track of the train's current position and calculates a safe braking curve for upcoming speed restrictions. If the braking curve is ever violated, ACSES initiates a penalty brake application. Overspeeding may result in a penalty brake application. Always adhere to the maximum authorized speed. ACSES allows for operating up to 3 miles per hour over the maximum authorized speed.
We will get to this later.
An alarm will sound. If this occurs, you have 8 seconds to reduce your speed before a penalty brake application. If the maximum authorized speed is exceeded by 6 miles per hour or more, an immediate penalty brake application will occur.
Yeah, that is
Remember,
correct.
Always adhere to the maximum authorized speed shown on the SDU, even if ACSES enforcement is disabled. Failure to do so may create unsafe conditions on the line.
Yeah. And for
As
your
an
train.
engineer in training, you should operate a few miles per hour below the maximum authorized speed. This will give you enough of a buffer to reliably avoid speeding penalties and react to speed reductions.
And now we yank in the brakes because we are supposed to stop here. Well, yeah. We will get to a lot of stuff that was said here. It is correct with the 3 and 6 miles per hour curves and the penalty brake. And yeah, the SDU, I think it is an ADU, an aspect display unit. But we will discuss this in the presentation in more detail.
That covers the basics of the ATC and ACSES safety systems. You can always replay this training module if you need a refresher on these topics.
Well, I would not advise that. So I'm usually very reluctant with criticism and everything because I always try to see the good things about everything. But this training module, I would not have let this go public. Theodora says, I remember Heise's comment about the driving tutorial in this game. Of course, it's very simplified, but he said no wonder people think they can drive the real thing. And yeah, Juniper, hey, trains in the great state of the United States of America. And Theodora's, yeah, ponders. Well, quite a lot of the information that was in the tutorial is correct. But if anyone can actually understand how those systems works by playing this tutorial, then it would surprise me. So if you know how the things work, then probably you can understand it from this tutorial. But as a tutorial to teach you how to use the thing, they should have said just adhere to the speed that they are giving you and don't worry. That would probably have been the better solution here. Let's look at the first part of the presentation. It is actually quite a lengthy presentation today, so be warned in advance. But this is because I found out how I can get more reliable information on those systems, safety systems that are used in the United States, and that is coming back to PTC, positive train control. And we know that since 2008 there is a regulation in the statutory law that railway carriers need to implement positive train control in their lines, and they had a couple of years to do that, and they had to tell the FDA, oh, that is not what I wanted to show, they had to tell the FDA how they were thinking of doing this and describe their systems. And those documents are on public record and can be found in the regulations site where the FRA documents, the approved ones and the applications and stuff are held for the public. So here you can find tens of thousands of pages that describe development plans, type approvals, implementation plans, and progress reports about, and some of those have also attachments, and those attachments can be like the service manuals for those systems, and from these you can get quite reliable information. So this is why I thought it makes sense to look at all this stuff that we have discussed before a bit more closely and a bit more in context. So what safety systems do we have on the locomotives that run on the Massachusetts Bay Transport Authority? We have obviously a system that checks if the driver is present and active. Our vigilance system, CIFA system in Germany, WACMA in France, Čuvač Aktivní in Poland. All those systems check if the driver is actually here and if he is active and able to do something. This is our crude alerter that we have since Sandpatch Grade. We have to push it in a predefined number of seconds if we are not operating controls. Otherwise, we will get an indicator, then an alarm, and if we still don't react, the penalty brake. This is not a big not a big secret. You typically find on the F40 and the HSP46 the switch for the alerter not in the fuse box, but in a switch on the locomotive panel that is behind your head. So turn around and there you can switch in the alerter cut out switch so that the alerter actually works, and then typically on one of the screens you actually can see a countdown. But this is obviously not enough if you want to provide positive train control, where we have to see if the driver is reacting properly to cab signals and speed restrictions. And the system that was already there before the positive train control is the ATS system, implemented on at least the southern part of the lines in the MBTA. Northern part did not have ATC, but the southern lines had. Now, since couple of years actually, they have it even in the northern parts, but before that they actually had to develop a special version of the ACSES system that works without ATC. Our lines are only in the southern part of the MBTA territory, so everything there has automatic train control installed, and that is, we will see that, a cab signaling system connected with a speed control system. You have to manage your speed, stay below the aspect that you are given. You have to acknowledge downgrade in signals and have to apply a permanent suppression with your brake if you are faster, and you will get an alarm if you are faster than the aspect allows, and if you are not reacting properly, then you can get the penalty brake. This leaves civil speed limits like track speeds and other things not to be controlled, and for that to make it a proper PTC system, we need a system like ACSES II here as an overlay over the ATC system to provide for all the missing functions that we do not have in the automatic train control system. We don't get rid of the ATC system, but we use the ACSES II as an overlay over the ATC system, or has been done a lot on railways where there was already something like a speed control system, often connected with cab signals. Yes, and this also requires you to manage speed according to the civil limits. Press a button if it is downgrading, and apply permanent suppression of your air brake if you are too fast at some point. Otherwise you will get an alarm at some point and a penalty brake. We will look into this more thoroughly when we get to this point. And then a function that the ATC could not provide so far is the positive train stop that comes from the ACSES II system, something that in Germany we would connect with the 2000 Hertz magnet. In Great Britain they would connect it probably with the TPWS system, with that stops a train at a red signal, where you have the two grids close together, so the train stop system there. And this was not in the ATC system. It only was able to slow down the train to 20, but not prevent a SPAD, and this is the positive train stop system that is enforced with the ACSES. Yeah, the fuses on the HSP46 are in the fuse cabinet behind your back. You open the door and you find two fuses labeled with ATC and ACSES, and this is for those two systems to be turned on so that they actually interfere with your driving if you don't comply. Let's have a look at our ADU and the ATC system. What we see, this is this funny thing that we find in our HSP46. On the F40 that we just drove, it is a bit differently, because the part that is here on the left is underneath, and we don't have the colors for the restricting and the maximum authorized speed aspect, but apart from that it works more or less in the same way. So this thing is our central device for handling the safety systems on the MBTA routes, and it is first of all a speedometer, so the figure that is given here with 0 is the speed that you're actually traveling on, and then you get a visual impression of how fast it is by filling this double circle here with an amber line, so you can see how fast you're actually traveling. So if you're traveling, it will be filled up to here and something like this. This is very intuitive, so no big thing. So this is the current speed that you are actually driving at the moment, the V ist, as you would put it in German. And then you get all the information from the ATC system and the ACSES system at some point. And on top, you have the speed limit, it says so, and so that you know whether the speed limit that is shown to you is derived from the ATC system. You have a lamp here lit telling you the ATC system is giving you this limit, and if the civil limit, the track limit, is lower, so that ACSES will provide the ruling limit, then the ACSES button will be lit and not the ATC button. So one of those buttons is on, the other button is off, and the figure that is shown in the speed limit box is the relevant speed limit for you, and you can see whether it is coming from signaling or whether it is coming from civil speed limits, track speed limits. Yeah, so let's first talk about the automatic train control, the legacy system, cab signaling system connected with speed control. It is a pulse code cab signaling. We have a video about pulse code cab signaling on the Boston Sprinter Road, discussing it in detail, how it works. So I will just treat this as something that you know. So you get continuous or coded cab signals out of track circuits, and those are connected with an automatic speed control, so you don't only get an impression and shown what you are supposed to do, but you're also controlled if you are complying with it, and the train will react with a penalty brake if you are not. So how does this work with the pulse code cab signaling? We have the track, we have a machine at the side of the track, and this is running a current through the rails. You're using one rail to send the current down this part of track, this section of track, then it is interconnected, then it is coming back and connecting in the machine, so that you have actually a current running in a circuit through the rails. And there are more segments, obviously, and they are insulated at those points, so that you have track circuit after track circuit after track circuit, and you can use that to do a lot of things. Especially you can see whether there is a train in the block, and also you can send your cab signal information along this track circuit. This is what we know a lot from the American lines, and what we also know from the Dutch route that we got. The automatische treinbeïnvloeding is also a cab signaling system that works just that way that I just described here, with pulses on the coded track circuits. The train is running there. The train has steel axles, and the steel axles are shortcutting this electric circuit, so that it is no longer running through the whole track, but in a shorter way. And this can be detected by this machine here, so the machine knows there is a train in the track, and at the same time we can put a receiver here on the train, and the receiver can listen to what happens in this track circuit. And especially you can send pulses on a certain frequency, like on an FM radio, where you modulate the frequency. You can pick a frequency and send pulses through this carrier frequency, and you can send little or more, or really a lot of them, and the receiver on the train can count it and then can see what cab signal aspect is displayed. There is obviously the case that there is no pulse at all, so there is no signal, and every time the receiver does not pick up any signal, this is connected with the most restricting aspect that the system can display. This is the 0 pulses per minute, resulting in restricting aspect, and this will result in the restricting balloon on your ADU lighting up. It is red here on the version that you have on the HSP46. It is just amber on the version that you have on the F40. It just means the same, and it is connected with a given speed, the speed of 20 miles per hour. In interlocking it's actually lower, it is 15, but here on the ADU it shows up as 20. And you see from this button being lit that this is coming from the cab signal. So this is typically lower than the speed limit that we have here, because of whatever reason the system is showing you a restricting aspect. Maybe you ran into this part of track here as the second train in a permissive block system, and then you automatically get the more restricting aspect. We have discussed this thing that's called multiple occupancy in our video about the pulse code cab signals. Let's pick a carrier frequency of 100 Hertz here at this point, and then we can define a certain numbers of pulses. We pick the numbers in the way that even if the system misses a couple of them or gets echoes or whatever, it cannot get it wrong. So 75 pulses is connected with the approach aspect that results in a limit of 30 that you get controlled against. 120 pulses per minute will result in an aspect that is called approach medium 45. That is called approach medium 45 because it allows you to go 45 miles per hour, and the 180 pulses per minute will result in the clearest system and in a 4 aspect pulse code cap signaling system. Was the first version more or less of this system, a 4 aspect system. This would be just the clear aspect. In the more advanced one, it is then the clear 125 aspect. Here it results in a maximum authorized speed aspect. We can go as far as the track limit and other conditions allow. So from our cap signaling system we don't get any restriction in this version of the ADU, at least. That's quite nice, but 4 aspects might be a bit little if we have trains that run much faster, and there is a big gap between 45 miles and maybe 150 miles that the fast trains can go. So we maybe need a bit more aspects. We could pick more different steps of pulses per minute, but that is getting maybe more complicated and easier to get wrong for the receiver. So why not pick a second carrier frequency and double the pulses per minute on a second frequency. So if on the 250 Hertz frequency we have 0 and only on the 100 Hertz we have those pulses per minute, then we get the classic aspects from the 4 aspect system. And if we get the 75 pulses per minute on both frequencies, then it is a different aspect, what also results in a speed of 30, and it is not really used on the Boston lines here. It's called approach medium 30. It is not an approach stop aspect, but it limits you to 30 anyway, but does not bear the idea that you have to stop at the next signal, right? It is used, I think, on the New York Trenton line in one instance at least, but in the Boston line you won't encounter it. This is why I did not light it here for us. If you double the 120 pulses, then you get an aspect that is called cap speed 80. That is actually used. You can see that if you run on your HSP46 towards Providence, because the Providence line actually has a higher civil limit than 79. We can't go faster with our HSP46 because the carriages that we are carrying can't go faster than 79 miles per hour, so we will be limited by the game to 79. Nevertheless, the aspect unit here will show us a higher speed from the axis, and at some point you can also see getting a cap speed 80 aspect that limits you to 80. At this point doesn't help you a lot because you can't go faster than 79 anyway, but the system works regardless of that. And if you double the 180, then you can even get a higher clear aspect of 150. You can see that in the Accela, you can see that on the ACS, the American City Sprinter, Vectron locomotive that we have in the Boston Sprinter DLC. There you can distinguish between the clear 150 and the clear 125. On our slow commuter locomotives here for the MBTA area, where we are limited to 79 miles per hour anyway, most of the time, it does not make a difference between clear 125 and clear 150. This is why both results in the maximum authorized speed balloon. Yeah, and even more aspects might make sense, not in the Boston area, but around the New York area. We can talk about where it is actually used when it is represented in the game, and when we stumble across it, we actually add one more step of pulses. That would be 270. So we always make sure that multiples of one step do not appear as a new step, because this is obviously something with the echo that can be problematic. So a single 270 on the 100 Hz with no signal on the 250 Hz would result in a cap speed 60 aspect here. This is where we've got the balloon for it, but it is, as far as I know, not used in the MBTA area, at least not on the represented lines here in the game. And if we double this aspect, we will get a clear 100 that results here in a 90 speed. Maybe it is used anywhere or somewhere with a 90, or it is just that we are using devices that were built for use in railway environments where those aspects are actually used. So every balloon that we have here has now its tag, without or with the exception of the stop balloon, because that is not connected with the ATC system. It cannot enforce a stop. We will get to this when we talk about the ACSES system. The most restricting aspect that we always fall back if something went wrong and we are not getting any pulses anymore is the restricting. So the system cannot stop our train, it can only slow us down to 20. What are the other buttons for ATC? You can see here for the status bars, you have an ATC status bar and an ACSES status bar on the HSP46 on the left, in the F40 underneath, and in the ATC you get a red light if the system is cut out, and it just turns off if it is cut in. So if you turn on the safety systems, then this red light will vanish. Otherwise, you know that you have to turn them on to get full scoring. There is a failure light. I have never seen it light up. It is maybe red too, but I cannot vouch for this. Then depth test means departure test. You have a button here for ATC departure test, and on the right, now covered by our tags here, is the same thing for the ACSES departure test. This will probably light up if the departure test is performed by the system. It is not implemented in the game, so I have never seen it before. Non-cap territory, this is a light that exists because you have this switch here for your ACSES system between non-coded and coded territory. And coded means for ATC, actually. Coded and non-coded, the northern part of the Boston lines were not coded. And then most probably this light would have lit up to show you that there is no pulse code in your track circuit, and that you're not getting any ATC information and aspects in the territory that you are on. This switch is not for the ATC but for the ACSES, so that the ACSES system knows whether it has to expect ATC codes or not. Those buttons here underneath are for both systems, and they give you an indication about what your train is doing. The V0 means that your train is at a standstill or moving very, very slowly. Then this light will light up. The overspeed button should light up if you are actually in an overspeed condition. That means you are traveling too fast compared to the relevant limit. We will discuss this when we discuss the workings of the systems more in depth. Brake up means that you are actually applying brakes at the moment, so that some brake force is applied by the train, and it will go off again if you release the brakes. And perm supp is for permanent suppression. That means that you have applied enough braking force to suppress a penalty brake application in a certain context, so that you're actually too fast. So typically you're driving according to a maximum authorized speed aspect, for example, and then you get a more restricting signal, and then typically you are too fast because you didn't see it coming. You can't see it coming because the signal is not visible at the code changing point, for example, and then you have to adjust to it, and then you will be too fast immediately. You have to put your brake lever into suppression, and if you apply enough brake force to this light here, permanent suppression, and then the penalty brake will not be applied unless you are getting much too fast. Then it will be applied anyway under certain circumstances. So those are the indicators on your aspect display unit for the ATC system. All those balloons for the different codes and different aspects, so not so super different from the Dutch system, for example. And what the ACSES lights and the stop button here does, we will see when we talk about the ACSES system. So what can this system now do for us? It can handle traffic. So if a train is in front of us and is occupying the line, then it can slow us down, so that we don't run into the train in front of us. And it can slow us down for getting diverted across a switch. So for routing it can also work and give us aspects that allow us to be slow enough to not be over the speed limit when we are running across a switch into a different route. What it can't do, it cannot enforce permanent speed restrictions like civil limits, line speed limits, PSR, permanent speed reductions. Also, it cannot enforce temporary speed restrictions. So those are the temporary speed restrictions that are because of whatever construction work or something that is of a not permanent nature. And it also cannot perform a positive train stop. It cannot prevent a spat. It cannot stop our train because we are not reacting properly to a red signal. And those things need to be controlled so that our system altogether complies with the PTC, the positive train control requirements. So this is why this system needed an overlay to confirm with the requirements since 2008 and in the years after. But first, before we get to this, let's look at how the system works in practice. And Theodore says, from this, I think ACSES kind of looks like temporary solution added to ATC that somehow ended up to be a permanent one. Yeah, I think it was meant as a permanent solution running on the pre-existing stuff, but implementing totally new systems in your railway operation is a huge thing. If you think of the discussion in Germany of how long it will take to get all the infrastructure modernized that is necessary to be modernized, now they are talking about they are finishing it up until 2036 or something. And just imagine ripping out all the existing train protection systems and replacing them with new ones. That is a huge task. Slows down the whole process, so everything that we can use and that is still in there. And we have the same thing with the ETCS modes that run on Class B systems, more or less, like the limited supervision thingies or the SN mode in ETCS. All that is more or less based on what is there, and we add something on top of it. And if it works, why not? And the ATC system actually worked for decades, so why rip it off? And actually the MBTA, they were more or less forced, from what I have read by the FRA, to install the legacy ATC system in the northern part of their network to comply with the PTC requirements. In the early versions of the implementation plans and the development plans, you can read that they wanted to use a special version of the ACSES system that works in territory where you only have the absolute block system and no ATC. But if you read in the later progress reports, is that they were actually forced to retrofit the ATC anew in the northern lines, so that the system as a whole works together, and it seems to work so far occasionally. So ATC system, I said it can do traffic and routing. So how does it work with traffic? This is our train sitting in the section of track and getting an aspect displayed by this track circuit that is maximum authorized speed aspect. It limits us to 79 because that is the fastest speed that our carriages can go and our coaches can go. So this is why we get our speed from the ACSES system here, what is at the same time line speed in my example here. Boston Worcester, you see that a lot, 79 from ACSES line speed. Then the line goes on, next track circuit, next track circuit, next track circuit, and here in this track circuit we have a second train sitting. So this train is picking up this aspect, whatever it may show, and the signal here, it is a restricting one. It is not a full red, unlike in European networks where you would expect it with absolute block system. The system that they use in the NEC and in the Boston area for the MBTA network is typically a permissive block system. That means we can enter the block that is already occupied by a train, but obviously we need to run on site, and this is why we get a restricting aspect here, and have to be careful not to run into the other train, and stay back and stop if necessary, obviously. So what signal will we get at this point here? In my example, it would be an approach medium, so that in the next track circuit our ADU aspect switches now to ATC, because now the signal aspect is below the line speed, that is, let's say 79 for the whole section that we have here, and it is displaying as the 45 that is connected with the approach medium 45 that we get here. Since the aspect is downgraded, our device will beep, beep, beep twice to show us that the signal aspect got more restricting, and we have to acknowledge this. A more restricting aspect we have to acknowledge by pressing the acknowledge button. We can get a penalty break at this point if we fail to acknowledge within a time that is not super clear how long it is. It is sometimes given with 6, sometimes with 7, sometimes with 8 seconds. So to be on the safe side, you should try to hit the button within 6 seconds after the alarm. And at the same time, if you're running this time of 6 to 8 seconds over the new limit without, and then you will be prompted by this if you are actually too fast, by beep 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 alarm, by putting your brakes into permanent suppression. Apply enough braking power with your air brakes so that the system is happy. So you're running with 79 at this point, let's say, and then you get this aspect here. Obviously you are too fast and cannot slow down from 79 to 45 in an instant, but you have now the system beeping at you. You have to acknowledge and put the brakes into permanent suppression, and then you will slow down gradually to the 45. The scoring system has now been fixed, what is really a good piece of news at this point. There was a time when we were always docked and for speeding when we got a more restricting cab signaling aspect. From what I've seen so far, now we are no longer getting docked for that. We have the time that the driver would have in real life to actually slow down and conform with the new aspect at this point. But we have to react within this given time frame of 6 to 8 seconds by acknowledging and putting the brakes into suppression. And for the ATC, from my experience, it depends on how much brake force you have to apply. You don't have to put the handle into the suppression position necessarily, but typically it is enough to put it into 60-65%, and then the line this light will light up and the alarm will go off. If you already happen to be slower than the new aspect, then you don't get the beep 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 alarm, but you will only get a double beep beep beep, and you have to acknowledge the drop even though you are slower to prevent a penalty brake. But obviously you don't have to apply the brakes into suppression if you are already slow enough. And if your speed dropped below the limit, then you can release your brakes again, but be advised to not release it before actually the speed is below the limit. Not on the limit, but below the limit. Otherwise it will start beeping again and will force you to put the brakes back into 60-65%, and then you are slower than before. So just wait until it, in this case, dropped to 44 and then release the brakes again, and you're good typically. Same thing will happen here. When you're getting closer to the other train, then the aspect would deteriorate more here to approach 30. This can happen, as we know, without a wayside signal at the code change point. Typically the aspects will not deteriorate unless you pass a code changing point, go into a new track circuit, unless in an emergency. But at the next code changing point here, you would enter the same block as the train before, and you are not picking up any signal anymore. This will result in a restricting and 20, and then you have to go on site anyway and not hit the train in front of you. And this is why you sometimes have the situation when the train then is running in front of you, going into a new track circuit. All of a sudden your aspect upgrades to 30 approach, or approach 30 again, and then you run on and enter the same track circuit that the train in front of you is in, and it will deteriorate or get worse to restricting again. So it can flip between approach and restricting all the time, because the train in front of you is leaving, the aspect upgrades, you enter the same block as the train in front of you, signal goes back to restricting. And so if you're more or less at the same speed as the train in front of you, then it will always flip between restricting approach. So it doesn't really make sense to go faster. And if the blocks are long enough, then it can happen with two other aspects as well, that it is flipping about. So most important thing, if it is downgrading, acknowledge it. And if you are too fast for the new aspect, brakes into suppression, what is typically enough at this situation, 60-65%, and then wait until the speed dropped below the new limit and then release. Routing is essentially the same, but for a different reason. Let's say this is our train sitting here traveling with 79 with the maximum authorized speed aspect. Then the track goes on, and then here I'm really proud of how I made this junction here, or this crossover or whatever. At any rate, you're going across a switch into a different track, and let's say the speed on this switch that you can go is 30 or 35 or 40. This is why you get medium clear at this point, telling you to be at 30 when you're approaching, and this is why the aspect that your ADU at this point picks up is 30 and limiting you to 30. And this will be announced to you by a downgrade in the aspect in the track circuit before. So those machines are actually talking to each other, so that you are not, that you don't get hit over the head by the 30 approach aspect out of the blue when running 73. Yeah, and after that, as soon as you managed this track section where you are slowed down to 30, are back into 79 miles per hour territory, then the signal will upgrade again. I made an error because it did not fit on my slide anymore, and for that you will only get a one single beep of 0.2 seconds in length. This is why it is green here, and you don't have to do anything but just register that now your aspect improved again, and you can accelerate again at this point. Sometimes it is wise to wait until your train has run its length. There are some rules for it, but I don't want to go into the details about those at the time being. Alright, next part of the presentation will be about the ACSES system. But before we do that, I want to drive around with the HSP46 a bit, and for that I want to go into the Boston Sprinter DLC, so I have to change it actually. Boston Sprinter. Where is it? Here it is. Boston Sprinter. No, was the wrong thing. Browser. Boston Sprinter. Now we are talking. And it is you can see here you get a new timetable for the Boston Providence route together with the HSP46 gameplay and DLC, and then you can use it here. And the Boston Sprinter one is probably the newer one, and I wanted to use this one 638 to Readville to not run the whole length. So it's a bit of a lengthy thing for the service marker. Because I have to give the information that we are now in a new timetable. Get started and turn on the sound again. So, first thing when starting a service in the Boston Sprinter DLC, always open the doors fast, because otherwise you will always be late. This is the cab of the HSP46. We put in our reverser handle to take over control, and you can see that here both the red lights are on. ATC and ACSES are cut out at the moment, so we have to cut it in. The alerter cut in is here, and the ATC is here, and the ACSES is here. That means now ACSES is cut in and ATC is no longer cut out. To be able to drive it, generator field, gauge lights for convenience, reading lights for convenience, independent brake, automatic brake to minimum. The lights are already on by default. Close the doors. I hope I did not forget anything. Release the brakes. And always after playing an introduction, we have to turn off those objective markers and stop markers again. And let's see if we're actually getting... Yeah, we are actually getting some throttle. It is released. Here we can see that we are applying some power. Here we can see it too. It's actually quite a nice screen here. We're running, and now you can see that we're actually governed by ACSES, and a limit of 10 is enforced. even though the ATC aspect is only restricting and will allow us to go 20. Slow clear on the dwarf. So in the Boston Sprinter DLC we actually have access coding at the station. Our nice HSP46, built by the same manufacturer that also built the baby bullet. Motive power MPI HSP46 it is called, I think, instead of the MPX express locomotive for the baby bullet services. What is actually a bad thing in my opinion, that we can no longer play the Peninsula Corridor DLC in Trains in World 6 because of the Caltrain licensing issue. I will miss the baby bullet and the MP15 DC switcher and also the F40 in the Caltrain scenario, in the Caltrain DLC. I hope they find a way so that we can use that again also under Trains in World 6. Theodore says it always feels odd to me looking at big American diesel pulling regional trains. Yeah, but look at how heavy and big those regional trains are. And it is a different feeling than driving an Electrostar or a Pacer. As nice as it is to drive an Electrostar or a Pacer, those thingies here are a bit more heavy. Signal is at approach. Axis increased to 15, but we have to run the full length of our train. So typically we have to wait until we get to the point where it increases to 30. Now it is actually okay. At the same time the ATC aspect, the cab signaling aspect, increased from restricting to approach. Now we can go 15 until the train has run its length, and that will be approximately when we reach the last catenary thingy before this bridge. So with a bit of luck we're not speeding and can accelerate to 30 now. And then we have to stop at Boston Back Bay again. Yeah, because when the sentence "big American diesel locos" mentioned, my mind pictures freight trains. Totally. Then comfort yourself with the thought that it is only one big American diesel locomotive here. Cab signaling aspect increased to 45. As I told you in the presentation, it only did a 0.2 second beep. The speed limit that is shown does not increase because now ACSES is the ruling gradient, and ACSES limits us to 30. Stop at Boston Back Bay. Weird thing is that in the Boston Sprinter DLC we are counted down by feet, whereas in the Boston Worcester DLC we are counted down by yards. That makes it a bit difficult to get used to the braking points, and I find it quite difficult to find the focus to stop the train properly, especially on stream when I'm thinking about a million things. Anything but metrics freedom. Well. In the brake and minimum. I think that should be enough for keeping the cars in place. So I think it is a really pretty locomotive. But as it seems, it was not a big success commercially. And from the 40-ish locomotives that MBTA bought, after a couple of years there were only like half of it running. And at the time being, from what you can see, the locomotive is no longer sold and advertised. So there had been technical problems with the turbocharger of the prime mover and things like this. But it is pretty. So when I said this one was built by Motive Power, then this is not the end of the story yet, because Motive Power now belongs to Wabtec, the company that comes from the Westinghouse Brake Company, and also owns not only the Motive Power locomotive manufacturer, but also the GE, the General Electric locomotive manufacturer units. So it is not a big surprise that this Motive Power locomotive here uses GE diesel engines for prime movers. Whereas EMD, Electromotive Division, what was always the big competitor for GE, that is now owned by Caterpillar by proxy of Progress Rail, uses Caterpillar motors on the F125, for example. Since we're passing at the platform here, I think we are obliged to blow the horn and have the bell running. Now, for example, you can see that the ATC is giving us a 90 for the maximum authorized speed here. Not entirely sure whether this should not be the ACSES that is giving us the 90 here. But if you look what the game is holding you to, it is the 79 that comes from our cars. Because our cars cannot go faster than 79. Locomotive itself should be able to go faster, I don't know exactly. But the cars don't. Somewhere I have read that the ACSES system can also control the maximum authorized speed for the vehicle in question, but I don't know if there is any way to punch into the ACSES system the maximum authorized speed, not of the locomotive, but of the cars that you're pulling. So we're not stopping at Ruggles, or we have not stopped at Ruggles. We're not stopping at the stations in between, because we are branching off to Readville, what is not in the DLC. It's the Franklin line. Yeah, Readville itself is in the DLC, but the rest of the line is not. Here we don't have to honk because there is one track between us and the platform. And now you can see a signal coming up, approach limited. And this will give us, you can see the alarm. I increase it to 62, and now the brake assurance is on. Here, brakes are applied. Well, brake assurance is what they call it. This hissing is just because the air brakes are releasing after the electric brake. The dynamic brake is blended in. So we had to apply the brakes to get the permanent suppression on and acknowledge. Released when we were dropped to 44. Obviously, since it took some time to release the brakes, our speed dropped a bit below. And now, what do we do? Do we accelerate? Do we have the train just coast? Depends, I think. Should be okay to accelerate again until we get the next more restricting signal. Maybe from this code change point here, from those housings you can see and those plates in the track, that you are encountering a new code change point, but we did not get a different aspect. We're still running under approach medium 45. And I said during the presentation that the aspects typically only get more restricting at the code change points or at the wayside signals, but they can improve every time, even between those points. So they can get less restricting on the way. And it is always funny to see for me how close the Dutch automatische treinbeïnvloeding is to this system. Now we're getting an approach. This means we'll probably get a more restricting aspect. We can see we did not get an alarm because I already put the brakes into permanent suppression. And now, just to show you, I released when I was not below the limit, but when I was at 30 exactly, and the alarm started again. I had to acknowledge again, I had to put it into suppression again, and the end of the story is that we are even slower than if I had waited until the speed dropped to 29. I've always loved the Boston Sprinter DLC, even when it was really hard to play in the beginning. And it was actually the first DLC that I bought in the Summer Pass event at the time, together with the London Brighton line and Dresden Nahverkehr. Dresden Riesa original version. And Theodoro says, I guess what I wanted to say with that temporary permanent solution is that why they name the whole new modified system like ATC II. I think this is because the ACSES system is a proprietary system by Alstom and Siemens, and it is sold to more than one railroad, and different railroads have different legacy systems So you have to run ACSES II over ATC, for example. And ACSES over like the Long Island Railroad that does not have an ATC system, but a different one that does not comply with this. And the ATC system is also a proprietary system by PHW, I think, in the end. Well, you saw we go for a short-term restricting aspect, had to slow down below the 20, and shortly after that it increased to 45 again. This is what I said, that the signal aspects on the ATC system can improve anywhere. We don't have to go to the next code changing point for that. But obviously it was annoying that we had to slow down according to the restricting aspect. And now we have to speed up cumbersomely to the 45. And the whole certification process is quite difficult. So like let's say you have a type approval by the FRA for the ACSES II system in principle. That does not mean that as a railroad you just go into the shop and buy the ACSES II system off the shelf and then you're done with. No. We're getting a medium approach on the next signal. That means we will probably have to slow down to 30 again. Before that we had the ACSES alarm for the incoming 30. Okay, locomotive stopped us anyway. And the nice thing is that on this locomotive, on this screen, you get information about where your penalty brake is coming from. AB info tells you there is info for you, and you can see EAB penalty enforced. Penalty source is still present. Don't know exactly why, because it was an ACSES. And why? What happened here now? Why did we get the penalty brake? Because at the same time we got a more restricting aspect on the ATC, and at the same time our limit on the ACSES dropped to 30. For the ATC change, putting our brake handle into 60-65 was enough to ensure permanent suppression. But the ACSES drop required more. They wanted us to put it into suppression. Acknowledge it. And you can see the message is done. That is quite tricky, right? If the ACSES drop and the ATCS drop coincides, then putting your brake into 60-65 for permanent suppression is not enough anymore, because before the ACSES you have to put the handle into the suppression position. Now we can release it again and go on. Didn't release it properly. No wonder that we're not moving. So I'm not entirely sure if this is how the system is supposed to work. I think that those two lamps here next to the acknowledge button actually should light up to tell you whether this is an ACSES alarm or an ATC alarm. You can distinguish it from the sound. The ATC alarm is faster, it goes like beep 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 beep. The ACSES alarm is a bit slower, it goes like beep 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 beep, as we just heard during this situation here. But also you should get a lamp that tells you without mistake whether the alarm is coming from the ATCS then on the left side or from the ACSES system then on the right side. Since we are approaching a red signal, the ATCS aspect dropped to restricting, and now watch out for the stop balloon lighting up. This is not ATC anymore, but this is now ACSES positive train stop. At a certain point, we got from the last balise the information that we have to stop at a certain point. And then a special brake curve will be applied to make sure that we don't run the red signal. We're slow enough so that this does not happen. But at some point I'll just drive on until we see it. Here you can see, and now if I don't do anything the system will break for us. We have left the edge of the represented area. Okay, anyway, the system gave us a penalty brake. Unfortunately, I should have been a bit faster than it would have invented earlier, and we actually would have seen what happens here. But this shows that the system with the positive train stop works. And I guess this is time for the second part of the presentation now, regarding the ACSES system. So, now the right side of our aspect display unit. Here. If we are ruled by the ACSES limit, by the track limit, then the right lamp will light up and tell us that whatever is in the box is the limit that comes from ACSES, what is track speed, more or less. ACSES II, because there has been a predecessor version, the ACSES I, and now what we are using and most of the railroads are using nowadays is ACSES II. Advanced Civil Speed Enforcement System. For whatever reason, in America, the track speed is called a civil speed limit. And what it can do is enforce permanent speed restrictions, temporary speed restrictions, and perform a positive train stop. All the three things that the ATC system can't. It cannot react to traffic. What it can do in a certain way is slow us down for routing when we are supposed to go across a switch. But for the traffic, we need the ATC. The routing can be done by ATC. It can be done a bit more precisely by the ACSES system, but I don't think that it is implemented everywhere. So let's turn off the music for a bit so that I don't have to shout at you. Those buttons here, they can work also if we are in ACSES mode here. So for ACSES we have a cut out and a cut in light. On the HSP46 version of this ADU, it is colored in red and in green, and it also has a failure light. I have never seen it lit in the game. Typically when the system runs you get this lighting up, database valid, telling you that it is more or less like a health indicator that the database that the system is using succeeded with the plausibility check. No TSR data can light up if the system thinks it did not get sufficient data for temporary speed restrictions. When this can happen, we will get to this later. And what a radio release is, we will see on the slide for the positive train stop. How does the system work? In addition to the coded track circuits that we have transponders in the track, balises that we know from ETCS level 1, that we know from GNT, for example, that we know from the KVB in France. And For example, also voor de verbeterde versie of de automatische treinbeïnvloeding in Nederland. And well, here we have transponders. And those transponders can be read by a device on the train, and they give the train information about the gradient, about the distance to the next main signal, for example, and especially about the speed profile until the next set of transponders. And this is not all, or this is not the only source of information that the train has to get information. It also gets information in by radio, what we know from ETCS level 2, for example, or other versions of communication-based train control. So there are not at every track circuit, but typically at every interlocking and at some strategic places, there are machines that can send a radio signal, and also the train can receive a radio signal to do this. And then what we just saw before it went dark in our service, this balloon here, this stop aspect that is in amber in the game. Don't know why it is not red, but it's in amber in the game. At any rate, I don't know what color it is in real life. This is the light for the ACSES positive train stop. It is not an ATC cab signaling aspect, but it is a light that is added by the positive train stop that is provided by the ACSES system. So much for the ADU. And now let's see how those components work together. This is the track, this is our train, this is our driver. There are signals, this is legacy. There are track circuits that can be coded, this is legacy, but they now get connected with a wayside interface unit that is connected with a base communication package. So more or less they get a computer that can send the status and communicate with the rest of the network. That can apply to signal controllers, interlocking controllers, switch circuit controllers, track circuits, hazard detectors, but from what I've read, MBTA does not have hazard detectors on the track. There is also a cable connection, the backhaul communication system, BCS, and they connect to a front-end processor at the dispatching units. And also is a radio connected with the radio network, and this front-end processor connects to a safety TSR server, STS, where the T is already an abbreviation for temporary speed restrictions. So this is the server that runs more or less the information and in a very centralized way the temporary speed restrictions. This server then connects to the PTC, the Positive Train Control Office network, where all the railway traffic dispatchers are located and operate the system and send the trains around. And if you have like what is the case on many lines in the United States, not only one a railway carrier operating on the line, but you have to meet the requirements for interoperability with other railway companies that use different kinds of PTC systems, like the IETMS system, for example. Then you connect them there so that you have more or less both systems running at the same time in your network. What is on the train? On the train you have a computer, the onboard computer, and you have a communication package for the train, a mobile communication package that does not only allow the driver to talk to the dispatcher, but it connects in a data network, the data radio communication system between the train, the office with the dispatcher, and the wayside units, especially that are connected with signals and track circuits and switch controllers and stuff. Obviously the train has to be able to pick up the information that comes out of the legacy track circuits. This is the ATC interface. This thing is blue because it reads the blue circuit here, and then it needs to be able to read the transponders. Scanner antenna system, CTV sometimes it is called. How does it work? This device more or less sends a so-called sweep frequency signal all the time, so it just sweeps the track with this signal, and when it hits a transponder, what is a passive system that does not need to be powered by an external source, then by induction it initiates that those transponders send back a data stream on a 4.5 megahertz probably, a frequency, and then the train gets the defined data out of those balises. Let's say like, hello, I am balise number so and so, and I tell you that the track in front of you has the following speed profile and gradient profile, and the distance to the next main signal is this, and before I forget, you have to stop in 274 yards at this point. And then this data is in the train. The computer can do something with it, especially display the information to the driver via the aspect display unit. So everything needs to be connected. Then the train has some sort of odometry so that the train knows where it is, and a speed sensor that the train knows how fast it is, and that it can compare the current speed with the speed that is in the computer as the maximum authorized speed. Then it needs to be connected with the brake system so that it can perform a penalty brake, and an event recorder is typically within the system so that if anything goes wrong, you can find the black box and see what went wrong so that you can prevent this type of accidents in the future. So what do we have? We have a wayside segment, we have an office segment, we have a locomotive segment, and we have the communication segment. So this is the typical thing that you have with most of the positive train control systems, that you have stuff running on your trains and locomotive devices, that you have stuff running on the wayside, like the track installations, signals, switch controllers, and so on, that you have your office set up, and this is typically where the server is that runs the whole system, and then you have a communication system connecting it that can be wired or wireless. The IETMS system will be essentially wireless. Here you have the backhaul communication system that connects most of the controllers with the dispatcher's office and other locations from which the dispatching is done. So this is more or less the technical stuff. And now let's see how it works, how ACSES II enforces permanent speed restrictions. Again, the example, our train is running here on this piece of track. It is getting a maximum authorized speed, a high green clear aspect from this track circuit. Then there is a track circuit, a track circuit, a track circuit. The wayside signal here would actually show the high green, for example, and here it is still the high green. But what happens at this point, you hit to a pair of transponders, and the transponder tells you the track speed limit drops to 60 in XXX feet and will increase then to 70 in YYY feet. So this is XXX feet and this is YYY feet, and the train knows at this point about the upcoming speed profile. And it will start at a certain point where it makes sense according to a predefined brake curve that is calculated according to the data of the train and the gradient data that the train gets from the transponder. And then actually this figure here will start counting down. You can see that in the game as well, that this speed that is shown here just counts down from the 79, 78, 77, 76 until it actually reaches the speed that is the and for that the computer calculates a curve where the speed should be, and especially an alert curve and a brake curve. The alert curve plus 3 miles per hour and the brake curve 6 miles per hour. This is what the computer thinks is more or less the curve where you should apply the brakes last, and this is the curve where it is getting interesting. And the figure that is shown here is still 3 miles per hour below the alert curve, until you get to the point where the 60 limit actually applies, and then it freezes here at the 60. You see your speed is coming from the axis. The maximum authorized speed does not change. The ATC aspect is still a high clear. And then you need to be at your 60. So if you are fast enough in reacting, then you can actually go by the counter going down. Typically, you should have the track knowledge to start braking earlier than this. If the new speed limit is actually there, you get a beep beep, just like with the ATC, that you have to acknowledge that now you have a lower track speed from the ACSES system. And you can get a penalty brake. It is a bit more complicated than in the ATC system. First, if you fail to acknowledge the drop in line speed within 8 seconds, then you can get a penalty brake. You can get the penalty brake if you're actually going over the brake curve. Then there is no more discussion and not waiting. If you are actually violating the +6 miles per hour curve, then you will get an instant penalty brake that you cannot suppress. If you're only going across the alert curve, then you will hear the beep, 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 beep alarm that we just heard in the example that we did. It is a bit slower beeping than the ATC alarm beep. And then you have 8 seconds to get the suppression on. And this, from what we have seen in the game, at any rate, you have to actually put your brake handle into the suppression position, what is on this locomotive, just like on the F40, just one notch further than the full service application. On the American City Sprinter 64 locomotive, it is around 70%, I think, the suppression setting, so that is normally enough. But on the HSP46 locomotive, you have to get it into the suppression setting and apply all the more brakes for that. And then you don't get the penalty brake unless you still violate the brake curve. So 3 scenarios where you can get the penalty brake: if you are getting a decrease in the line speed controlled by ACSES, failure to acknowledge within 8 seconds, hitting the alert curve and failure to get the brakes into suppression within 8 seconds, and violating the brake curve. Then there is no more 8 seconds waiting time, then you will get the penalty brake immediately. What does happen if the limit increases? Like here at y/y feet, it increases from 60 to 70. It just increases and it does one beep, just like with the increasing aspect on the ATC system. And then you can adjust to the new limit, but only after your train has run its length. So from what I have seen, the system does not know how long your train is and does not factor this in. So you have to know that yourself and wait for your train to pass this point before you accelerate to the new limit. So this is permanent speed restriction. How do we control temporary speed restrictions? The temporary speed restrictions are communicated to the drivers by a periodically issued medium, so that the drivers are instructed, but this does not instruct the train, obviously. So where does the system, the ACSES system, get the information about temporary speed restrictions? And that is actually quite clever, because the locomotive typically pings wayside stations that are connected with the radio network, and then those sections transmit the data about temporary speed restrictions for about the next 3 blocks or something, and then the locomotive knows in front of it, the track that it is going, if there are any temporary speed restrictions, and then they can be enforced just like the permanent speed restrictions. And if this can't be done because there is no machine with the radio, that you can also install temporary transponders that just tell the train in passing that there is a speed restriction coming up. With those passive transponders, this is actually not so difficult. You don't have to connect them, but it is obviously sleeker if you just punch it into your system and then it is transferred by radio to the train. If for whatever reason this does not work and the train does not get an answer or no proper answer about whether there are temporary speed restrictions ahead, then this lamp probably will light up. At least it would make sense with no TSR data warning you that you are running into a section of track where the locomotive did not get valid data about temporary speed restrictions. And those are enforced the same way as the permanent speed restrictions then. Yep. And with that, permanent speed restrictions, temporary speed restrictions, and now the positive train stop. What is the thing that was essentially missing in the ATC system? What is the situation? Our train is sitting here in this part of the track, and then there is another track circuit, and then we're coming up to a junction and there is a red signal. We have to stop. That means we're getting an approach here. And in our transponders are also in the track. Those are the last pair of transponders we get before we hit the junction where we can't get in because the red light is on. Because we're approaching the red light, our ATC aspects already deteriorated to 45 as soon as we go into this track section. After the approach signal, it will probably get more restricting to 30 and the approach aspect, and then we get into this track circuit where there is no signal because it is just in front of the red signal, and our system will switch to the restricting aspect with 0 pulses. And this is ATC. But this is the end of the story as far as ATC is concerned. It will make sure that our train is not going faster than 20, but if we just pass the red light with 20, ATC will not intervene. And this gap has to be filled by the ACSES system. And it works essentially in a way that the transponder tells the train stop in a distance of so and so much feet. And when the train is getting closer to this position, it does what it does best. It calculates brake curves, and alert curves, and a brake curve, an intervention curve. Again, +3, +6 probably. I was not able to confirm that anyway. At any rate, you will have for the positive train stop a special alert curve and an intervention curve. And I think as soon as you're getting on the alert curve, you will get the stop indication here without counting down, without the 20 getting changed at this point. At least this is how it works in the game. The stop light lights up, and it tells you that you have to slow down essentially and stop at the point where you are not violating the red light. If you're going too fast, going beyond the brake curve, you will get a penalty brake. So this is the positive train stop thing that the ACSES adds to the aspect display unit here. When you're approaching a red light, get a penalty brake if you get over brake curve. How actually it is connected with the alert curve, how long you can go along the alert curve, if there is an acknowledge necessary at this point, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it is with the 8 seconds here, maybe it makes sense to acknowledge it if you want to go to your position. If you ignore this aspect here and you want to go to your stopping position in the game, then typically the game will cut you short and stop you, and then you don't get precision points because the train stops short, what can be annoying if the last car is then still out in the open and not at the platform. So take this seriously, slow down, and rather creep the last yards or feet to your stopping position to prevent the positive train stop to stopping you short. When talking about this, there must be a way to allow the train to proceed, right? Problem with transponder-based systems is that if the train actually stops now, we don't really have a way to give him the clear after the signal cleared, right? think back of the Verbeter system, for example. How do we tell the train that it can proceed? There is a way to improve the ATC aspect to anything better than restricting. Then the stop impulse, the assignment to stop will vanish, and you won't get a positive train stop, or can be allowed to go on if you have already stopped. So if anything better than restricting happens in the track circuit, you can go on. The other thing is that the radio thingy at the junction can send a radio release signal to the train. This can make sense if you are allowed to pass the signal now, but with a restricting aspect, then you cannot change the ATC aspect to something better or anything better than restricting. But if you want still that the train can go on, like after a stop and proceed signal, for example, or anything that you can pass now with restricting, then you can radio release the train. And for that, we have this one lamp on our ADU that can light up in case of a radio release, and the train can go on and is no longer stopped by the positive train stop. And last but not least, there is also a stop override button, what is a bit like the Befehlstaste on the German trains, or the AWS override key on the British trains, or the Manövertaste on French trains. You can push the button and then you can unlock this positive train stop enforcement. This button is under a protective cover and not on your dashboard, but behind you on the locomotive panel. That is a lot of warning that you should not use this button nilly-willy, because you must have authority and a good reason to pass the red signal if you can't get radio released and not get a better aspect than restricting, right? So only with authority, and then you should be limited to 15 miles per hour. I've not tested this in extenso, whether it is actually implemented in the game properly. I think from what I've seen that you can release that stop thingy with this button, so that you can actually force yourself into a SPAT situation. But if it actually controls you to 15 miles per hour, then I don't know. Positive train stop. When talking about release, how do we release from a penalty brake anyway? Throttle to idle, and then air brake to suppression. This is most of the time what helps you, and the HSP46 is nice, as we have seen, that it tells you about the status, about what is wrong. Typically this yellow badge here tells you AB info. There is something that tells you how to release your situation. PCS open tells you that the pneumatic control switch, the pneumatic control switch has opened, and that the power has been cut off because of an emergency brake typically. And this tells you that there is recovery information, and here in those two lines the locomotive tells you what you have to do. Yeah, you got a PCS penalty, and to recover the air brake, go to suppression. You put the handle to suppression. If you have to acknowledge something, then you acknowledge, and then typically all this gets cleared and you can go on. Much easier than with the old locomotives, where you had to put the handle into emergency and wait for 1 minute, and after 1 minute you could check if the PCS light turned off if you move the handle out of the emergency, or if you did something wrong. So nice, this locomotive is actually giving you instruction how to release. And this system with a positive train stop can also be used for some other things, like for example you can enforce the diverging limits on a switch. Instead of a 0 restriction at this point, you punch in like the diverging speed limit, 30, 40 or whatever. Then this can be enforced in this way. You can use it to enforce stop and proceed signals in absolute blocks, in automatic block system territory, and you can also use it for failed grade crossings. So if the protection at grade crossings does not work properly, the dispatcher can put in a 0 miles per hour temporary speed restriction and use this system to make sure that the train stops in front of the stop and proceed signal or the failed level crossing. But this we can discuss in more detail if we ever get it implemented in the game. Good. To close down this presentation, the map, just where we are driving around with our 2 DLCs that we have for this part of the world. This is Boston, and this is the old Boston Sprinter line as far as it is in Massachusetts. At this point we go to Rhode Island and then to Providence. This is because this is why it gets a different color here, because here the ownership of the line also changes. And we have in the Boston Sprinter DLC this branch line to Stoughton. That was the old Boston Providence. Sometimes it is called Northeast Corridor Boston Providence. Originally it was called Boston Sprinter, and this is what the game calls it in the menu where you can select it. As long as we have the magenta color, the line ownership is with the MBTA, sorry, at this point, and here it belongs to Amtrak as the line is in Rhode Island. This is the other DLC from Boston via Framingham to Worcester. At Framingham, ownership changes again. Here it is correct, MBTA, Massachusetts Bay Transport Authority. This is the most recent American DLC, route-wise at any rate, and here the ownership for the MBTA goes to Framingham, and from there to Worcester. Best guesses who owns this part of the track. It is CSX territory, so it is not surprising that we actually encounter CSX locomotives there. Good. That's it so far with the presentation. A lot of stuff in the presentation today, and still I want to do some train driving. So we go back to the Boston Worcester DLC. And I think for that I only prepared one service, a special service. It is called a Geometry Extra service. I stumbled across it in the line where you can pick your services. Where is my sound again? Yes, here we are. Boston Worcester timetable, and if we just use this version now. There is a Geometry Extra Boston to Worcester service, and I did not know what a Geometry Extra service is, so I tried to find out, and from what I have found out, this is actually a service that runs maybe only every 6 months with a special train with special sensors and stuff. And it is more or less for checking out your infrastructure, if it is still valid and proper, and if anything needs to be adjusted. And there is, as well as you said, Tiger, many variants from different places about how to approach the same problem of operating railroad. Yes, I'll watch the rest later, gonna sleep now. See you all later. Theodorus, thank you so much for staying with me for this lots of information, different approaches for the same situations. Yeah, it is always fascinating how many different approaches you can have to get the same problems sorted out, and we should never stick to what is familiar and what we know, but look at the stuff that other people invented and how great this might be. Alright, our locomotive it says wait for a moment. We're not picking up any passengers, so we have more time to set up our train. Never forget to switch on the generator field, otherwise there is no way that we can get this train moving. Since we are not loading any passengers, we can release immediately. Switch in our safety systems. Also, this display is here is quite nice. You can see in this egg crates what systems are still preventing you from running, for example. Here the indie brake. Yeah, and without a stop we're going through to Worcester. What's the problem? Why are we not getting any? Okay, throttled up too fast, probably. Sometimes the train does not like that. And again, we are in Boston Worcester. No access information on Boston South Station. Nevertheless, we are limited to 10, but not controlled by ACSES. Don't know if this is because on this track we don't have ACSES. It's totally possible. I don't see any control transponders in the track, at any rate. But then, it wasn't the best idea to use this track for the introduction. And I really love how those different types of coaches are connected here. Double deckers and single deckers. And since we are the geometry extra train, probably full of sensory equipment. This time we're getting a high green at this set of signals. So our restricting aspect on the ATC should improve to maximum authorized speed and show us the access limit. As soon as we get to the code changing point here. And this is what happened. Should be able to go 15 now. Even though the system is already indicating the 30. We have to travel our length. Are we longer than a usual train? Oh, we are. We are really long. Look at that. We are. Oh well, nevertheless. Maybe this is the normal length for this for those trains here. So we're actually under no pressure. We don't have any time for the arrival at Worcester. This is maybe why in the timetable view the length of this service is given with 0 minutes. So you might have noticed that we are going into Boston Back Bay on the opposite side. ATC got more restricting from clear to approach medium 45. But since we are not going faster than the 30 that we have from ACSES, it was only necessary to acknowledge it. Yeah, a bit late. Should have honked and rung the bell. Well, this looks nice, the inside of this tunnel, doesn't it? So let's see how we fare with this service. I picked it because it was something special, and after all, because we are a bit faster down the line without stopping, because stopping for passengers really slows down the whole operation. New transponders. Medium clear here. At least I thought this was a medium clear. Aspect stayed at approach medium 45 though. Maybe it should have been flashing. Axis increased to 40. Train has to run its length. And then we can accelerate. high green, and immediately the ATCS aspect improved. Increase to 45. Train has to run its length. Passing now the Boston landing area, I think. And now to increase to the line speed limit of 79. But it's actually quite interesting because most descriptions of the ACSES system tell you that the civil speed limit can only be communicated in increments of 5 miles per hour. But obviously the 79 maximum speed can be communicated here. Mind that here it is probably line speed. Soon after the next station it will drop to 60 again if I'm not mistaken, so maybe not overdo it. Just accelerate a bit over the 60 if at all. So that we can react if we see the ACSES system starting to count down like it does now. I don't know if this route was a great success money-wise. It is so often the case. Never heard anything anymore after the release. I think it's a beautiful route, but this might be because I'm in love with New England anyway. So, same situation again. Civil limit increased. To 79 for a short spell, but will increase to 60 again soon. Here you saw that you need to acknowledge the drop in line speed even though you are already not faster than the new limit. And now the increase to 79, and now it stays a bit, I think. Train has to run its length. Follower Fisher is raiding with a party of 4, so nice. Welcome party of 4 of Follower Fisher on our geometry special service from Boston to Worcester. So if I had better route knowledge, I'd know how long we can go with 76, because soon enough the limit will drop to 60 again. But we still have to, like, 2 stations to go before this happens. Can sneak a peek on the preview and can see that it is already in less than 2 miles that this will happen, so I might just coast in there. Or even slow down a bit so that we can react as soon as the access limit will be counted down. Can't be for long that we can go on 79. So from 70 it should be safe as soon. Ah, it starts already. And the countdown is always quite fast. Now we need permanent suppression, because we also got a limiting ATC aspect of approach medium 45. So at least 60% air brakes until the speed drops to 44. And we can release again. Should have set the throttle to 0 though. To prevent a traction lock. See if we get the better aspect of this. No. This is probably because we're going across a switch. Sometimes we're going across a switch here in this area, and then we get slowed down by the ATC system. It's a 50 switch, but anyways, since there is no aspect connected with a speed of 50, flashing green in the middle, if I saw that correctly, that means there is a limited clear. Can't go faster than 45 across this switch. Probably going to the left now. Yes, we are. And this is why we got the approach medium. Now we're back to a 60 access limit. Just wait for the train to clear the switch. And the ATC aspect go back to maximum authorized speed. Follower Fisher, thank you so much for the follow. And for the raid. Now within this 60 stretch there is one station where we have to slow down to 55 miles. Look at this beautiful landscape in Massachusetts. Follow Fisher, no problem. Sorry, I had to quickly take the dog out. that is a thing that I know too well. taking the dog out in between streams. Probably the next station is the one with the 55 limit. Sneak a peek, yeah, here, Wellesley Hills. And the civil limit drops to 55 there. Here we did not even get the countdown, did we? Access limit just dropped to 55. But soon enough it will go back to 60. And then eventually to 79 before we get to Framingham. Increase to 60. Train has run its length probably. So we can actually throttle up again. We're still on MBTA territory. We're getting closer to Framingham. Don't even know if we get an increase to 7. Now we're going all the way, yeah, over there. Over there we will get the limit to 79 again. Now we're going uphill. And those heavy bi-level cars, the speed drops so fast in an incline. Light signals here. Oh, I actually went too fast. And 3 clicks above the limit, and ACSES gave us the alarm. Beautiful how in this screen you can actually see brakes applying, brakes releasing, or the electronic brakes, the EP brakes. Only a medium clear. Approach medium 45 here. If it was a medium clear, why not a 30 aspect? So why are they slowing us down? Are we going across the switch again? It's a bit weird because it was an unannounced medium clear without an approach medium before, or maybe I saw the colors wrong. Let's see how this develops. New transponders at any rate. Approaching another station. So why did we get this 45 aspect for? There is no switch in this part of the world that we could go across. Did we run into traffic? Then the medium clear aspect is surprising. It's not the typical traffic aspect. Here's a whistle board. There are not that many grade crossings. 14L pattern. Long. And now the ACSES limit actually caught me by surprise when I was still doing my pattern. Have to move the handle all the way into suppression when you get the ACSES alarm. That's the 30 limit at 4. Yeah, and we went out fast enough. Maybe the top light on the signal before that was a yellow one and it was an approach medium, and here's the medium clear. That makes more sense. But also now the ATCS aspect did not drop to 30, even though the wayside signal showed us a medium clear. That is a bit weird. So, if I'm not mistaken, this is Framingham. And at the same time, the end of the route ownership of the Massachusetts Bay Transport Authority. Medium clear again, so probably we're going across the switch when leaving Framingham. At any rate, now we are in CSX territory. Yes, we're going across the switch. Gondolas with scrap. And here you can see the CSX locomotives. Testament to what I just said, that we are in CSX territory now. So, now that we are in CSX territory, we get actually some hazard detectors line side. And the last 18 miles to Worcester. Here on the CSX track, we have at almost every interlocking
the clear to next interlocking markers with the letter C and the white flashing light if it is on, in case that the cab signals don't work. This is why we have no wayside signals in between. This guy was a bit close to the brink, wasn't he? I wonder when we get the increase in track speed limit to 79, if ever. All those nice creeks and rivers. Those indicators is what I was talking about, but I don't think that they are implemented in the game, not even in this DLC here. And we don't need it because our cab signals work properly. Only 12 miles, and here we actually get the increase to 70. What am I doing with my brake? Wrong hand. But I'm afraid it won't be too long that we can go with 70. We're already done at this bend, yes. And then we are going through Westborough, and after that we get an increase again. So for the next bend we have to slow down. So, you saw how the alarm was not before it actually had counted down to the 60 limit, and then it needed to be acknowledged. Not during the countdown. I wonder what kind of sensors they put into our train. So much more relaxing if you don't have to stop. Yeah, I'm so happy that they got the water up here so much nicer now than it used to in whatever the first Isle of Wight. So what about an increase in line speed? We only have 6.4 miles left. I'm already speeding because I'm craving an increase in line speed. But we are actually getting a further reduction . Is this Grafton already? It is. In this case, it is not surprising that the limit dropped to 55. And now the increase to 70 for the last leg to Worcester. Then we will probably get slowed down by signals. There's a 55 section here. Let's see how it works out. It's only 4.9 miles anyway. High green. Now if you miss it, then you have to go all the way to suppression with your brake handle. And then you can power into your releasing brakes Maintenance guys will be happy about that. Now we got the approach medium 45 on the ATC, and this prepares the stop at Worcester already. So most probably the ATC aspects will just go down with every code change point from the approach medium 45 to the approach 30 and then to the restricting. And then we have to stop, and we will see how this positive train stop here will be managed. Just let us zoom in on to our ADU, so that we can see what happens there. Guess we have to apply a bit more power. Otherwise it will take too long. Here is a set of new transponders. And we're getting not only the approach 30, but also some rain. We almost made it through the service without any rain. And on the second but last mile, here it is. So Now I guess we are touching the city limits. Approach. So actually we should be prepared to stop at the next signal. And this is Worcester, Massachusetts. That's already in the next signal. So if we actually have to stop there, and we would be obliged to yank in some more brakes, but we can see that we are getting a different aspect from a stop aspect. Red over yellow over red should be a medium approach aspect. Spinner Tornado, hello! Spinner Tornado, learning some of the US signaling. Actually, US safety systems. ACSES II over ATC in the Massachusetts Bay Transport Authority version. Signaling is NORAC here. In particular, it's the seaboard. Restricting aspect at the same time as a access downgrade. Oh, I'm not quite sure about the access downgrade. At any rate, we are now running on site, approaching a red signal. That means as soon as we are breaking the alert curve for the positive train stop, we should have the stop balloon light up, and if we don't slow down properly then and violate the brake curve, we will get a penalty brake. So let's see if we can actually go to our designated stopping position after that. Spinner Tornado, yeah. The safety systems in America are a bit confusing because it varies a lot depending on region. Standardization enforced by the FRA is happening, but it takes a lot of time to the sheer size of the network. Yep. I just found out recently that you can find a lot of stuff and documents that railroads have to file with the FRA for approval in terms of developing, implementing and keeping up the positive train control requirements. And that means that you can find rather reliable information on the safety systems used, even the legacy ones. So let's see at what point we're actually getting the stop balloon light lit up. Because we still have 300 yards to go. So I'm deliberately being a bit faster so that we're not missing the stop balloon indication from the ACSES positive train stop. front of there is our red signal. Here, now we got it. Let's see if we can make up without getting shot down. No. Here we got shot down. We should probably have been slower at this point. We violated the brake curve. And bomb goes the penalty brake. So return to free roam. How will we release that again? In this situation, stop balloon on. First we would have to try to release the penalty brake as such. Pneumatic control switch is open. We have at any rate to put the automatic brake in suppression. And acknowledge, and now you can see our brakes are releasing. But if we're starting again, the stop aspect here would probably stop us anyway. So the only way, if we would forcefully want to go beyond this signal, will be the positive train stop override button here, that we can only push with authority. And now you can see here the stop button vanished and we are back to restricting. Actually it should restrict us to 15 miles per hour if I read the sources correctly. But it put the ATC back to resisting, so now we could try and blotch the service by running the red signal. Alright guys, almost 3 hours in the stream. I hope you enjoyed my blundering through the positive train control system that is used by the Massachusetts Bay Transport Authority to run the trains here from Boston to Worcester, partly on their own tracks, partly on CSX tracks, and the legacy ATC system that the ACSES II system is overlaying, more or less. There will be more on American safety systems, since now I have unlocked this trove of information with the FRA public records. So expect more about the Long Island Railroad, for example, and other things that we have not properly covered yet, and maybe we will get some new American content with Train Sim World 6 as well. For today, thanks guys for staying with me, for the support, for the raid, for the follow, and see you next Sunday. Take care and be nice to each other. Bye bye.